The call shattered my peaceful retirement night like a sledgehammer through glass. It was 1:47 a.m., and I'd been sleeping the deep sleep of a man who'd earned his rest. 3 years ago, I hung up my prosecutor's badge after 35 years of putting scumbags behind bars for the federal government. These days, my biggest worry was whether the bass were biting down at Lake Travis. The rain was coming down hard on my lakeway roof, the kind of Texas storm that usually rocks me to sleep in my colonial home overlooking the water. I'd built this place as my retirement sanctuary, complete with a workshop where I spent my days crafting furniture and a dock where I kept my fishing boat. Life was finally simple. But when my phone rang at that ungodly hour, every instinct from my decades in federal courtrooms kicked in like a punch to the gut. Calls at this time never brought news of lottery wins or surprise promotions. They brought the kind of trouble that changed lives forever. I'm Owen Mitchell, 62 years old, and I thought my days of midnight emergencies were behind me. I was wrong. When I answered, the voice on the other end made my blood freeze solid. It was Grace, my 26-year-old daughter, but she sounded like someone had put her through a meat grinder. "Dad, I'm at the Travis County Sheriff's Office." Each word came out broken, like she was forcing them through gravel. "Mason hit me, Dad. But he called 911 first. He told them I attacked him with a kitchen knife. They believe him. They have me in holding." My feet hit the hardwood floor before my brain fully processed what she'd said. Mason Parker, the real estate golden boy who owned half of downtown Austin's commercial district. The man who'd stood in my backyard 2 years ago, promising me at their wedding that he'd take care of my little girl like she was made of spun glass. I'd always had reservations about Mason. Too smooth, too perfect, too quick with the charm. But Grace was head over heels, and after her mother died when she was 19, I'd learned to pick my battles. I figured love would either work itself out or teach her lessons I couldn't. "Dad," Grace whispered, and I could hear the pure terror threading through her voice. "There's a deputy here. Deputy Adams. He keeps looking at me funny, then at his computer, then back at me. I think he knows who I am, or who you are." That made sense. In 35 years as a federal prosecutor, I'd put away enough criminals in Texas to fill a small town. Some of those cases made headlines. Some of those convictions had family members who held grudges. And some local cops remembered my name from the witness stand. I was already moving, pulling on clothes with mechanical efficiency. Jeans, boots, flannel shirt, leather jacket. The same outfit I'd worn to 100 crime scenes back in the day. "Grace, listen to me very carefully. Do not say another word to anyone. Don't sign anything. Don't answer questions. Don't even tell them what time it is. You understand me?" "Yes, Dad. I'm coming." "Hang on, sweetheart." I hung up and headed for my F-150, my mind already shifting into the tactical mode that had served me well in federal court. The drive to the Travis County Sheriff's Office normally took 22 minutes from my house, but normal was off the table tonight. I made that drive in 15 minutes flat, my truck cutting through the rain-soaked streets of Austin like I was chasing down a fleeing suspect. Every red light I ran was calculated. Every turn was precise. Tonight, I wasn't Owen Mitchell, the retired prosecutor who spent his mornings fishing and his afternoons building rocking chairs in his workshop. Tonight, I was a father whose daughter was in a cage, and nothing else mattered. As I drove, fragments of memory flashed through my mind. Warning signs I'd ignored because I didn't want to see them. Grace missing our Sunday barbecues that had been tradition since she was 12. The long sleeves she'd started wearing in July heat. The way she'd flinch when Mason laughed too loud at family dinners, like she was bracing for impact. I'd spent 3 decades recognizing the patterns of abuse in strangers, putting together cases that sent wife-beaters to federal prison. How had I missed it happening to my own daughter? The guilt hit me like a freight train, but I shoved it aside. Guilt was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. Grace needed the prosecutor, not the guilty father. I pulled into the sheriff's office parking lot and killed the engine. The building squatted there like a concrete fortress, all harsh angles and fluorescent lighting bleeding out into the Texas night. I'd been here countless times over the years, usually walking in as the federal heavy hitter who was about to make some local detective's day very difficult. I marched through those front doors with the kind of authority that comes from 35 years of never backing down from a fight. The desk sergeant looked up. Young guy, probably new, definitely not expecting a 62-year-old man in civilian clothes to walk in like he owned the place. "Sir, visiting hours are..." I leaned over his desk, close enough that he could see I wasn't in the mood for bureaucracy. I'm Owen Mitchell, federal prosecutor, retired. You have my daughter, Grace Parker, in a holding cell, and you're going to tell me what's happening right now. The color drained from the kid's face like someone had pulled a plug. Mr. Mitchell, sir, we didn't know she was your daughter. Now you do. Talk. The kid started talking fast, stumbling over his words like he was defusing a bomb. She's being held on domestic assault charges, sir. Her husband filed the complaint. He came in around midnight, bleeding pretty heavily from his arm, said she went crazy with a knife while he was sleeping. I felt that familiar prosecutor instinct kicking in, the one that had served me well in 847 federal cases over 35 years. Something about this story stank like week-old fish. Who's the investigating officer? Deputy Adams is handling the initial report. Captain Brooks is overseeing since it's a high-profile case. Mr. Parker, well, sir, he's got connections. Big donor to the sheriff's re-election campaign. Of course he was. In my experience, the guys who beat their wives usually had two things in common. They were cowards, and they had enough money or influence to make their cowardice look respectable. Where is she? Back in holding, but sir, the protocol. Deputy Adams around? Yes, sir. He's with Captain Brooks and Mr. Parker taking a statement. I knew Brooks from the old days. We'd worked cases together when he was a detective, back before he got political and started worrying more about his pension than actual police work. Good cop once upon a time, but ambition had a way of corrupting good cops. Buzz me in. The kid hesitated for maybe 2 seconds, looked at my face, and realized this wasn't a request. He hit the button, and I heard that familiar electronic buzz that had opened more doors for me over the years than I could count. I walked down that institutional hallway, my boots echoing on the linoleum like gunshots. The smell hit me first, that unique cocktail of industrial disinfectant, stale coffee, and human misery that every police station in America shared. It brought back memories of late nights building cases, of sitting across from suspects who thought they were smarter than the system. But first, I needed to see Grace. Everything else could wait. They had her in a small holding room, not even a proper cell. She was sitting on a metal bench with her knees pulled up to her chest, rocking slightly like a child trying to comfort herself. When she looked up at the sound of the door opening, my heart stopped cold. Her left eye was swollen completely shut, a grotesque purple bulb against her pale skin. Her lip was split down the middle, crusted with dried blood. There were finger marks on her throat, dark purple against her fair complexion. But it was the look in her good eye that almost brought me to my knees. The hollow, defeated stare of someone who'd been broken systematically over time. Dad. The word came out like a sob. I was across that room in 2 steps, dropping to my knees in front of her, like I had when she was little and needed her scraped knees kissed better. But this was no scraped knee. She fell into my arms, shaking so violently I could feel her ribs through her torn pajama shirt. And that's when I felt it. The telltale give of at least 2 broken ribs, maybe more. Under her silk pajama top, I could feel the raised welts of fresh bruises. "I've got you, sweetheart," I whispered, holding her as gently as I could while my mind cataloged every injury like evidence in a case file. "I've got you now." She pulled back slightly, wincing with pain, and I got my first good look at what that bastard had done to my daughter. When I gently pushed up the sleeve of her pajama top to check her hands for defensive wounds, what I saw made my vision go red around the edges. Her arms were a road map of violence. Fresh bruises in purple and blue overlay older ones in yellow and green. The pattern told a story of systematic, repeated abuse. And there, just above her left elbow, 3 small circular burns. Cigarette burns. "How long, Grace?" My voice came out steady, but inside I was fighting to keep control. She looked down at her hands, shame flooding her face. "About 8 months, maybe more. It started small. Just pushing, you know? Then grabbing too hard. Then..." She gestured helplessly at her battered face. 8 months. 8 months of my daughter living in hell while I sat in my comfortable retirement, building furniture and catching bass, completely oblivious to the fact that the most important person in my world was being tortured. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out harsher than I intended, and she flinched like I'd raised my hand. "Because you're Owen Mitchell," she said through tears. "You put away serial killers and organized crime bosses. You're the strongest man I know. I didn't want you to think I was weak. I didn't want to disappoint you. I took her face gently in my hands, forcing her to look at me. Listen to me very carefully, Grace. You survived 8 months with a monster. You are not weak. You are the strongest person I know, and you have never, not once in your entire life, disappointed me. She nodded, tears cutting clean tracks down her swollen cheeks. But right now I need you to be strong for just a little while longer. Can you do that for me? Yes, Dad. I stood up and I felt something shift inside me. The guilt, the shock, the overwhelming rage, all of it crystallized into something cold and sharp and useful. I'd prosecuted men like Mason Parker before. I knew how they thought, how they operated, how they tried to game the system. But Mason had made one crucial mistake. He'd hurt my daughter, and now he was about to discover what 35 years of federal prosecution experience looked like when it was personal. I walked out of that holding room and straight toward the office at the end of the hall where I could hear voices through the partially open door. I didn't knock. Knocking was for people who weren't sure they belonged. I threw that door open like I owned the building. Captain Brooks was sitting behind his desk looking tired and annoyed, like a man who'd rather be home in bed than dealing with domestic violence at 2 a.m. Across from him, holding an ice pack to a neatly bandaged forearm, sat Mason Parker. Mason looked absolutely perfect, even in crisis. Expensive cashmere sweater, dark designer jeans, hair tousled just enough to suggest distress without actually looking messy. When he saw me, his face shifted through a complex series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally that sickeningly sympathetic smile I'd seen him use on waiters and parking attendants. "Owen," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Thank God you're here. This is such a tragedy. Grace, she's not well. I've been trying to get her help for months, but tonight she just completely snapped." "Shut up, Mason." The silence that followed was absolute. Mason's perfect smile faltered like a light bulb flickering before it dies. Brooks stood up, puffing out his chest in that way cops do when they think their authority is being challenged. "Now wait just a minute, Owen. I've got a victim here with a knife wound. Your daughter's in custody for aggravated domestic assault. You can't just barge in here and—" I turned my prosecutor stare on Brooks, the same look that had made seasoned defense attorneys stutter and sweat during cross-examination. "Brooks, have you conducted a full forensic examination of my daughter? Have you photographed her injuries? Have you documented the defensive wounds on her hands, the pattern bruising on her arms, the cigarette burns on her body?" Brooks's face flushed red. "We followed standard procedure. Mr. Parker had visible injuries. He identified the aggressor. You identified the aggressor based on who could afford the better suit and who had more connections to the sheriff's re-election campaign. I cut him off. Did it occur to you to ask why a 26-year-old woman would attack a man twice her size while he was sleeping? Did you wonder why she'd call her father immediately if she was guilty?" I leaned forward, using every inch of my height advantage. "If you process her, if you book her without a complete medical workup and forensic examination, I will personally file a federal civil rights lawsuit against this department, the county, and you individually. I will make it my remaining life's mission to strip you of that badge and your pension. Do you understand me?" Brooks went pale. He'd seen me work cases before. He knew I didn't make idle threats. "I want a forensic nurse here in the next 30 minutes, I ordered, and I want to see that incident report. Now." Mason stood up, shaking his head with perfectly calculated sadness. "Owen, please, you're being emotional here. I understand she's your daughter. But look at my arm." He held up the bandaged limb like evidence in court. "She cut me. She's dangerous. She needs help, not protection." I took a step toward him, and something in my face made him shrink back despite being 6 inches taller than me. "I see the cut, Mason. Clean slice, superficial, on the outside of your forearm. Wrong angle for a defensive wound from someone lying in bed. Perfect angle for self-infliction by someone trying to create evidence." For just a fraction of a second, his mask slipped completely. Real fear flickered behind those calculating eyes. "But more importantly," I continued, my voice dropping to the tone I'd used when cornering serial killers, "I saw Grace's arms. I saw the cigarette burns." Mason's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about. She must have done that to herself. She's been having episodes, Owen. Self-harm. I've been worried sick about her mental state." That was his second mistake. The first was touching my daughter. The second was thinking he could lie to a man who'd spent 35 years learning to spot liars. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Charlotte answered on the first ring. "Dad, What's wrong? It's almost 3 a.m. Charlotte, I need you to wake up and listen carefully. Go to your apartment right now. Remember that box Grace gave you last Christmas? The one she said only to open if something happened to her? There was a pause, and then Charlotte's voice shifted from sleepy confusion to steel. The shoebox. Oh God, Dad, is Grace? She's alive and she's going to be fine, but I need that box. Bring it to the Travis County Sheriff's Office, now! I hung up and sat down in the chair next to the door, crossing my arms. We're going to wait. Mason was staring at me, his smooth confidence cracking like ice under pressure. What box? Owen, what are you talking about? I didn't answer. In my experience, the more a guilty man talked, the deeper he dug his own grave. The next 25 minutes were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Mason tried to re-establish rapport with Brooks, tried to remind him of their golf games and charity dinners. But the air in that room had shifted. Brooks was looking at the paperwork differently now, sweating as he realized he might have stepped into a federal case. Mason kept glancing at me, trying to read my face. But I'd spent 35 years perfecting my poker face across from defendants who'd killed for less than what he'd done to Grace. When Charlotte burst through the station doors, soaking wet from the rain and clutching a battered Nike shoebox wrapped in duct tape, I felt the first surge of hope I'd had since answering that phone call. She ran straight past the desk sergeant, her heels clicking on the linoleum like a countdown timer. When she saw Mason through the office window, she stopped dead in her tracks. "You bastard," she hissed, loud enough for everyone in the office to hear. She handed me the box with shaking hands. Grace made me promise never to open it unless she died. She said if anything happened to her, this would explain everything. I placed it on Brooks' desk and pulled out my pocket knife to cut the duct tape. This, gentlemen, is what we call insurance. Inside the box was a passport, $3,000 in cash, and a silver USB drive that looked like it held the secrets of the universe. "What is this?" Brooks asked nervously, like he was staring at a live bomb. "Insurance policy," I said, plugging the drive into his computer. Grace is smart. She knew no one would believe her word against a man with Mason's money and connections, so she started collecting evidence. The folder opened on Brooks's screen, displaying hundreds of files organized by date and type, audio recordings, video files, photographs, all meticulously cataloged. Grace had been building a federal case against her own husband. I clicked on a video file dated just 4 days ago. The screen filled with their living room, shot from what looked like a hidden camera on a bookshelf. Mason and Grace were in the frame, and Mason was screaming, "You are worthless!" His voice came through the computer speakers, clear as a bell. "You are nothing without me! Nothing!" Then, on screen, he backhanded Grace across the face. The sound was like a gunshot. She went down hard, hitting the coffee table, and he stood over her, kicking her in the ribs while she tried to protect herself. I watched the real Mason in the office physically flinch as his recorded self committed felony assault right there on the screen. I clicked another file, an audio recording from 2 weeks ago. Mason's voice filled the room, calm and terrifying. "If you ever try to leave me, Grace, I will hunt you down and kill you. I'll make it look like an accident or a suicide. Then I'll cry at your funeral and everyone will comfort poor Mason, the grieving widower." The room was dead silent except for the sound of Mason's increasingly rapid breathing. I paused the recording and looked at Brooks. "Still think my daughter is the aggressor here, Captain?" Brooks was staring at Mason like he was seeing him for the first time. The admiration, the golf buddy camaraderie, all of it was gone. In its place was the disgust of a father who had daughters of his own. "Mr. Parker," Brooks said, his voice heavy with authority. "Stand up." Mason remained seated, shaking his head frantically. "This is fabricated. That's deepfake technology. She manufactured all of this. You can't believe—" "Stand up!" Brooks barked, using the voice that had gotten him through 20 years of police work. Mason stood on shaking legs. Brooks was behind him in seconds, pulling his arms back. "You're under arrest for aggravated domestic battery, assault with a deadly weapon, false reporting, and—" Brooks looked at the computer screen where the audio was still paused. "Making terroristic threats." The metallic click of the handcuffs was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. "I'm calling my lawyer!" Mason screamed as Brooks shoved him toward the door. "Get me Adrian Foster! This is a setup! Owen, you know this is a setup!" As they dragged him past me, Mason locked eyes with me one final time. The mask was completely gone now. It was just the face of a cornered rat who'd finally been caught. "See you in court, Mason," I said quietly. The bail hearing was set for 9 a.m. that morning. I spent the remaining hours at the hospital with Grace and Charlotte, watching doctors tend to my daughter's broken body. 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, defensive wounds on her hands, and those cigarette burns that would scar her for life. But she was alive, and she was safe, and that bastard was in a cage where he belonged. The courtroom was packed when we arrived. Mason's arrest had hit the morning news cycle hard. Real estate mogul arrested for domestic violence was irresistible clickbait for the Austin media. Mason sat at the defense table with Adrian Foster, Austin's most expensive criminal lawyer. Foster was whispering reassurances, probably calculating his billable hours. But then something happened that nobody expected. The back doors of the courtroom opened, and 3 women walked in. I didn't recognize them, but I recognized the look in their eyes. It was the same look Grace had in that holding cell. District Attorney Cooper stood up. "Your Honor, additional witnesses have come forward." The first woman stepped to the bar. "My name is Isabella Romano. I was Mason Parker's assistant 3 years ago. He fractured my jaw and threatened to ruin my career if I reported it. When I saw the news about Grace Mitchell, I knew I had to come forward." The second woman was young, maybe 22. "He dated me in college. He locked me in his apartment for 3 days. I was too scared to tell anyone." The third woman held up her right hand. 2 fingers were bent at unnatural angles. "He broke these when I tried to leave him. I never pressed charges because I was afraid." The judge looked at Mason, then at the growing group of women. Bail denied. Defendant remanded to custody until trial. The gavel came down like thunder. The trial took 4 months to prepare. Every day, I sat in that courtroom watching my daughter find her voice again. The evidence from the USB drive was overwhelming. The testimony from 4 women painted a picture of a predator who used his wealth and status to silence his victims. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, there was no cheering, just a collective exhale from everyone who'd been holding their breath for justice. Mason got 18 years in state prison. 6 months later, I was sitting on Grace's new front porch in Dripping Springs. She'd bought a little cottage far from downtown Austin, far from the glass penthouse where her nightmare had lived. She was painting again for the first time in years, working on a canvas filled with blues and yellows, storm clouds giving way to sunshine. "Dad," she said without looking up from her brush, "do you miss it? The prosecutor job?" I watched the sun set over the Texas hills, thinking about courtrooms and justice and the difference between law and protection. "For 35 years, I thought justice came from courtrooms and procedures," I said. "I thought it was about laws and precedent and putting criminals behind bars." I turned to look at my daughter. She was healing, scarred but whole. "But that night when you called, I realized real justice isn't about the system, Grace. It's about standing between the people you love and the monsters who want to hurt them." She put down her brush and took my hand. "You saved me, Dad. You saved yourself, sweetheart. You were smart enough to gather evidence, brave enough to survive. All I did was answer the phone and drive fast. We sat there as darkness fell over Texas. The nightmare was over. The scars were healing. And I finally understood what it really meant to be a father.